Ladies and gentlemen, let us start the first session on the subject of 2022 Climate Energy Agenda, Republic of Korea presidential candidates. I would like to welcome the host of this session, Kim Si-yu, Youth Representative of Coalition for Our Common Future.
Good morning from the 8th Seoul Climate Energy Conference. I'm Si-yu Kim, Youth Representative of Coalition for Our Common Future. And it is my honor to welcome you to the Plenary 1 2022 Climate Energy Agenda, Republic of Korea presidential candidates. Considering the growing importance of climate energy leadership, in this plenary session, we take this opportunity to look into the climate energy agendas and policy directions from 4 presidential candidates of Korea, candidates of Democratic Party, People Power Party, Justice Party, and the People's Party. We requested each presidential candidate to evaluate within 7 minutes to evaluate the carbon neutral policy of the current administration and discuss the gist of candidates' climate energy policy direction, including measures for bipartisan governance, social consensus, and measures for the young generation who are the real agents of change. Given that the CEC is an international conference, I speak English as a MC, but we ask presidential candidates to speak in Korea in their video messages, considering their audiences are targeted to Korean voters. Without further ado, I would like to welcome and start with presidential candidate Ideomyong of the Democratic Party of Korea.
여러분은 헛된 말로 내
You have
꿈과
stolen my
의지를 훔쳐갔습니다.
dream and my childhood with your empty word. This is the outcry of Swedish teenager Greta Thunberg. Thunberg warned that the wrong response from the current generation in climate and environment approach is killing people and pushing the Earth ecosystem to the brink of destruction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Ideomyong, presidential candidate for the Democratic Party. So, the current generation must provide clear answers and clear actions for the future generation. Korea has already pledged to the international society a 40% reduction by 2030. This may pose a threat to the manufacturing and export-oriented Korean economy. However, I firmly believe that this era of great energy transition is an opportunity for us. Modern Korean history is full of stories of development within crisis, and the people and the youth were at the core. I believe in the great power of our people and youth. The global economy has already ventured into the era of energy transition. A great carbon trade wall is being erected in Europe. Carbon neutrality is an unavoidable generational quest, and we must actively seek ways to change. I, Ideomyong, will not stop in this change against the crisis. I'll create a new opportunity for Korea with the youth to overcome the hurdles of the climate crisis and energy transition. And from now on, I'd like to present 2 social systems that will be at the core of Korea's transitional growth. First, future energy system. The global economy is quickly transitioning into a decarbonized economy. We have no time to wait. Korea, rather, must lead the change. The US President Biden decided to invest over 1,400 trillion won to innovate social infrastructures. The Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung administration will not wait. I will make a national level, quick and massive investment, changing and constructing the future energy system. As such, I propose to the people Korea Future Energy System, which is called the Energy Highway. Energy highway is the essence of a distributed energy network where anyone can produce and sell renewable energy anywhere. It is where production, supply, and consumption go hand in hand. Simultaneously, Korea's new technologies based on advanced fourth industrial revolution such as ICT, AI, and IoT will be incorporated into the power grid to construct the smart energy foundation such that the people and the industry will benefit from the comfort and profits. In addition, I'll introduce the energy dividend where the local population can participate in the renewable energy development process. I'll open the era of renewable energy annuity where the sun and wind becomes asset, forming the basis for the solar annuity and wind annuity. Realizing this policy will lead to the income increase to the local population. People will go back to the countryside, providing a foundation for the development of rural areas. Energy highway will be directly related to the development of new industries. In addition to solar wind generation, VPP, ESS, and VGT come under this criteria. A more active investment in efficient renewable energy production technology such as Pervo, Fisk, and the future mobility-based technologies like solid-state batteries will form the basis for future innovative growth. The Lee Jae-myung government's energy highway, like the industrial highway by Park Chung-hee and information highway by Kim Dae-jung, will be the iota of the innovative growth that leads to in innovative industries. Second is equitable and just transition system. Energy transition inevitably bring about many changes. That change, however, should not be bore by a single person. This country should interfere to correct the justice and imbalance and create opportunity for growth for country and people. Lee Jae-myung administration, based on a strong social safety net, will ensure an equitable and just transition system. The end of coal power generation, the end of internal combustion engines are not a story of a future. Decarbonization will make many jobs disappear. Currently, areas concentrated with power plants and industrial complexes now suffer from fine dust and environmental pollution. In the future, its core economy will suffer from loss of jobs, double suffering. Special sacrifice requires special rewards, that is an equitable and just transition. Lee Jae-myung, who knows best the tears of the poor and the honest sweat of the workers, will now leave you to be the sacrifice of social change. Creating a considerable just transition fund, an ample social network will be ensured for companies, workers, and the disadvantaged classes hit by the transition. Areas hit by drastic industrial transition will be designated as a special district for just transition and will be supported in full for job transition and revitalizing the local economy. In addition, new jobs will be created in green industrial areas like the green district platforms, smart green city, zero energy buildings, carbon emission reduction facilities, and high energy efficiency projects appropriate for the energy transition. I'll create an environment where our youth can become leaders who lead the transition through energy startups and talent trading. I, Lee Jae-myung, can state that with confidence, anyone can talk about overcoming the climate crisis, but not anyone can solve the climate crisis. All having been verified in action rather than words, I'd like to end my presentation quoting Greta Thunberg. The world is waking up and change is coming whether you like it or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Presidential Candidate Lee. Now I would like to welcome Presidential Candidate Yoon Sung-yeol of People Power Party.
안녕하십니까? 국민의힘 대통령 후보 윤석열입니다.
Good morning. I am Yoon Sung-yeol, the presidential candidate of the People Power Party. Congratulations on the opening of the 8th Seoul Climate and Energy Conference, and I'd like to thank KAIST and Coalition for a common future for organizing this very meaningful event and giving me the opportunity to discuss future policy directions for climate and energy. The rapid climate changes that we are experiencing stem from abuse and misuse of fossil fuels. The international community has committed to carbon neutrality by 2050, and Korea, as a responsible community member, will actively take part in the effort to reach carbon neutrality. In order to create and implement a specific roadmap for carbon neutrality, there needs to be an agreement among stakeholders as well as a social consensus. However, the current Korean government has made the very important decision to cut NDC by 40% by 2030 without listening to the industry and without social consensus. Non-experts have led the decision-making process without clarifying detailed action plans or who will pay for the cost and how. Climate change is a critical challenge that is closely linked to energy, key industries, and jobs. So climate issue is an economic issue, as well as a national security issue, an issue of life and safety of the people. I respect the spirit of the Paris Accord, which says the NDC commitment should not be retreated, and will implement the following policies based on national consensus. First, I will reassess the populist policies of nuclear power phase out. In order to attain carbon neutrality, there has to be dramatic reduction of fossil energy, which is a main source of CO2 emission. Then, the only energy sources that remain available to us are nuclear and renewable energy. This is why most of the nations are planning their energy mix for carbon neutrality with renewable and nuclear energy sources. I will carefully review the harmful consequences of the populist nuclear power phase-out policy. Through in-depth discussion with leading nuclear power experts and social consensus among the stakeholders, we will forge a new energy mix scheme for carbon neutrality, which will include nuclear power. Second, I will ensure that science, not ideology, is the basis for climate change policy formulation. Globally, tens of trillions of dollars are being invested into climate and energy sectors. Of course, we need the best professionals, not amateurs. This is why President Biden has declared that science is back at the White House. I will establish a presidential science and technology governance body and make sure that climate change is dealt with as a core responsibility of the president. Third, I will set up 3 pillars of response, namely green technology, green financing, and green human resources. Response to climate energy changes are related to global technology hegemonic competition. In order to survive such competition, cutting-edge, leading technologies are needed. I will ensure that green technology, which will determine the future of national economy, receive a massive investment flow. Global competitiveness in major technology sectors such as energy, mobility, battery, semiconductors, intelligent power grid, and CO2 capture will be achieved. As can be seen with global interest in ESG, finance is flowing towards values that put emphasis on environment. Private-public green financing system will be established in order to capture and utilize opportunities that have just emerged. What is really important is people. The real stakeholders in the climate change dialogue are the young people in their 20s and 30s. I will help develop capabilities and power of these young people so that they can draw and make decisions about their future. World-class green education programs and business environment will be developed so that the youth can become experts in environment and energy sectors. Climate changes should not be subject to political negotiations or ideological novice idea contests. Carbon neutrality will be attained based on science and technology, and green transformation will be made into an opportunity for a new leap forward. I will listen carefully to all the suggestions made today to make sure Korea is able to lead the global green transformation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, presidential candidate Yoon. Now, I would like to welcome presidential candidate Shim Sang-jung of the Justice Party.
Good morning. My name is Shim Sang-jung, presidential candidate for the Justice Party. Thank you for inviting me to the 2021 Seoul Climate Energy Conference. And I have taken a moment to ponder about a reason the conference has invited the presidential candidate of each party. It mostly likely is because the climate crisis is an issue that is directly related to our survival. As the COVID-19 pandemic struck the weak members of the society the hardest, the climate crisis is becoming a catastrophe. Surely a bigger one for the weak. A worker working outside during the summer collapsed from overheating. Flowers bloom in orchard but do not bear fruit due to the cold. The pain of the elderly living alone in a small room without air conditioning is getting worse. The weak are not the only ones being threatened. Korea's central industries such as automobile, shipbuilding, and steel are carbon-based. Without a proper response to the climate change, the Rust Belt will be a common picture across Korea. Workers in the front and rear industries of the carbon-based industrial complex will be driven into massive unemployment. Young people having to endure the era of the climate crisis are intuitively aware of the danger to come. According to a European survey, 53% of the young may come to support an authoritarian government if the regime come up with climate measures. Unfortunately, there is no sense of urgency for the climate crisis, although it is the biggest threat to the democracy in Korean politics. Democratic policy candidate Ideomyong says he will achieve carbon neutrality by 2040. However, his policy includes the ban on the sales of internal combustion engines rather than the ban on driving altogether. People Power Party candidate Yoon Suk-yeol has virtually no climate measures other than nuclear power generation. The crisis in the two-party system is that they are not aware of the urgency felt by the citizens concerning the climate crisis. I, Shim Sang-jung, will be the climate president facing the crisis and making decisions. Neither the government, business, nor individuals can live as they have done until today. Economic growth, industry, and individual lives must be reconfigured within the limits of the earth. The climate agenda will be the number one strategy in the Shim Sang-jung administration. Korea's 70-year-old construction, gray and carbon-intensive economy will be transformed. In order to dramatically transform the carbon-based industrial structure, just transition will be the basis of state administration encompassing energy, industry, and jobs. To overcome the climate crisis, the Shim Sang-jung administration will push for the strongest governance in which every citizen participates beyond the domain of the government and business. To this end, I will promise the following policies. First, my administration will reduce carbon emission by 50% compared to the level of 2010 by 2030 and create 1 million green jobs. Coal generation will be shut down and renewable generation, currently lagging at 7%, will be expanded to 50% by 2030. We will build housing power plants, village power plants, and community power plants owned by cooperatives or communities throughout the country. Solid government support will be ensured. Small modular nuclear power plants which take 10 years to commercialize cannot be an alternative. It only delays the timetable for carbon neutrality. An immediate shutdown of nuclear plants is not what I'm stating. My denuclearization policy is to close nuclear power plants that have reached the end of their lives and stop building new ones. Nuclear power generation will stop by 2040, considering that the life of the current nuclear power plants is over. Second, my administration will supply 10 million electric vehicles by 2030 and establish a sustainable transportation system. During my term, we will electrify public transportation such as bus and taxis and introduce congestion fees in the 6 major cities. Free public transportation fees will be provided to the vulnerable to facilitate their mobility and reduce carbon emissions. Third, my administration will overhaul Korea's fiscal policy to establish the foundation for a decarbonized socio-economic system and a green state. We'll secure an annual 20 billion won through the newly proposed carbon tax, which will be used for the Just Transition Fund to support the socially disadvantaged. No single president, party, or government will be able to overcome the climate crisis. All political parties must combine forces. In addition, we'll only overcome the crisis through mastering the participation of all citizens. Conflicts that arise over the installation of renewable energy facilities in local regions result from excluding the local population. I propose a National Climate Emergency Committee where not only politicians but also locals and civil societies can participate in. It is through this committee that I intend to muster the wisdom and the will of the entire country. The climate crisis of today has resulted from the current generation's greed for infinite growth and development. It is the gravest of the international justice issues that threaten the survival of the future generation. Until today, our ancestors have handed down to us a bounty more than they have received. The current generation has inherited 13% more than what our previous generation have. Nonetheless, this is in stark contrast to the fact that we have inherited as little as 40% less in natural capital. Following this destructive trajectory, our basis for survival may simply disappear. Our desperately fight to resolve the climate crisis, succeed in green transition, and give back the future to our future generation, one that they deserve. Overcoming the climate crisis is a farewell to the 200-year-old fossil fuel civilization. It is the sharpest political issue in that the whole country must mobilize to its fullest. In that sense, this presidential election must be an election of the climate, and I urge my fellow citizens to vote for our climate. I, Shim Sang-jeong, will be the first climate president. I, alongside you, will race to reach the green coexistence society, one where human and nature coexist. Thank you.
Thank you, Presidential Candidate Shim. Now, I'd like to welcome Presidential Candidate An Chol-soo of the People's Party.
안녕하십니까.
Good morning.
국민의당
I am An
대통령
Chol-soo,
후보
the presidential
안철수입니다.
candidate for the People Party.
제8회 서울
Congratulations
컨퍼런스
on the
개최
opening
축하드립니다.
of the 8th Seoul Climate Energy
지속 가능한
Conference.
지구를 위해서 행사를
I would like to
개최해
thank
주신
Christ Graduate School of Green Growth and the Coalition for a Common Future for organizing and hosting the conference for a sustainable planet. As Professor Robert Stephens has remarked in his keynote speech, nature will not remain silent indefinitely. Climate crisis is a global challenge that threatens humanity's sustainability. We have an obligation to ensure that the future generations be able to enjoy the environment and benefits of the nature that we have enjoyed. What I can say for sure is that Republic of Korea's key strategy to respond to climate crisis is through carbon neutrality. Since time is limited, I want to focus on power generation, which is just one part but an important part of achieving carbon neutrality. The current government's ignorance and bias for the past 4.5 years have eroded national energy strategy and made carbon neutrality impossible to achieve. The whole world is saying that carbon neutrality without nuclear power is impossible. But the government, immersed in political ideology, has been obstinate about phasing out nuclear power. Now, based on scientific facts, we need to correct the incorrect policies. I will legislate an act on climate crisis and set up a national climate change commission so as to responsibly and proactively deal with climate change. Korea's excellent nuclear power technology, including SMR, will be developed as part of a national strategic project and will receive strong support for export. Given Korea's circumstances, it will be impossible to be carbon neutral with only renewable energy. Solar and wind power are not efficiently generated on the Korean peninsula. It is not possible to generate electricity at night or when there is no wind blowing. And electricity production cost is also very high. Therefore, energy mix of nuclear and renewable power sources is essential in stably supplying power without carbon emission and maintaining the nation's export competitiveness based on affordable electricity is absolutely essential. Carbon neutrality 2050 is a tremendous challenge for us, and as forecasted by the experts, doubling of electricity demand will be exacerbating the situation. The government's role at a time like this is to secure the essential energy sources and at the same time achieve carbon neutrality. In order to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, I will set up a national energy strategy with nuclear, renewable, and other energy source mix. I will bring back lost 5 years of nuclear power. And with the energy mix strategy, I will achieve carbon neutrality, energy sovereignty, and economic growth on the road to 2050 carbon neutrality, a promise to our future generations. I will listen with high expectations and interest to the in-depth discussion as the experts discuss about carbon neutrality 2050, green financing, and ESG, zero waste, and circular economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Presidential Candidate An. So to summarize briefly on my end, Presidential Candidate Ideomyong pledges to make climate crisis to a growth opportunity with the young generation, suggesting a energy highway, a distributed energy system, with fair and just transition process. And Presidential Candidate Yoon Suk-yeol pledges to revamp nuclear phase-out, forming triangular formation of green technology, green finance, and green talents, especially for the young, and making science center of the climate energy policy. And Presidential Candidate Kim Sang-jeon pledges to become a climate president, making climate #1 national strategy, promising community-oriented power plants and sustainable green mobility, and under just transition for decarbonized economy, budgetary reform. She promised that again. And Presidential Candidate An Chol-soo pledges fact-based scientific decisions and a combination of renewables and nuclear in his strategic energy mix, thereby achieving carbon neutrality, energy sovereignty, and economic growth. And all of four candidates have emphasized the role of young generation in their policy direction. So for presidential pledges, there is real estate economy, COVID-19, and job creation, and there are many other issues. But watching presidential candidates with their committed climate energy policy directions, I can feel that climate crisis has become now a presidential agenda, not only around the world, but also in Korea. And personally speaking, as youth representative, this session was meaningful not only because climate change is an existential issue for the young generation, but also because many analyze younger generations in their 20s and 30s as a casting vote in the 20th presidential election of Korea, and the votes from so-called MZ generation are expected to be affected by how effectively their issues and their interests will be handled rather than a specific political orientation. And this session, in this sense, was such an opportunity to see how climate energy policy directions will be headed, which by far is one of the main interests of our generation. So there is only 89 days left before the 20th presidential election of Korea, and with a hope of having more climate presidential agendas and having more climate leadership, this is the end of our session. Thank you.
Thank you all for your presentations and ambitions for the Republic of Korea.